June 8, 1967. International waters, Mediterranean Sea. USS Liberty, a 455-foot technical research ship, sat 14 miles off the coast of Egypt. On paper, she was an electronics research vessel, an innocent observer, a neutral party monitoring communications during the Six-Day War raging between Israel and Arab nations. But that's not what she really was. USS Liberty was a spy ship, an NSA signals intelligence collector packed with the most sophisticated eavesdropping equipment the United States possessed. She could intercept military communications, decode encrypted messages, track troop movements. She heard everything, saw everything, knew everything happening in that war, and that made her dangerous. At 3:05 p.m., unidentified fighter jets screamed out of the cloudless sky. Napalm, rockets, 30mm cannon fire. For 25 minutes, they tore the Liberty apart. Then came the torpedo boats, circling, closing in at high speed. One torpedo struck amidships, ripping a 39-foot hole in her hull. Machine guns strafed the deck. They shot at life rafts in the water. They jammed emergency radio frequencies. 34 Americans died. 171 were wounded. Nearly 70% casualties. And when it was over, when the smoke cleared and the blood was washed from the decks, Israel said, "We're sorry. We thought you were Egyptian. Terrible mistake." The United States government nodded, accepted the apology, paid compensation, case closed. Except it wasn't a mistake. It couldn't have been. And the sailors who survived that day, the men who watched their friends die, they knew the truth. This is the story of Operation Silent Storm. The mission that officially never happened, the attack that officially never was. To understand what happened on June 8th, you need to understand what USS Liberty really was. She started life as SS Simmons Victory in 1945, a cargo ship built in the closing months of World War II. Nothing special, one of hundreds rolling off assembly lines to supply the Allied war effort. But in 1964, everything changed. The Navy took her to Norfolk, Virginia. They spent $20 million outfitting her for a new mission, supporting the National Security Agency by collecting and processing foreign communications and electronic signals. They installed massive antenna arrays, sophisticated listening equipment, code-breaking computers. They packed her hull with technology that could intercept radio transmissions from hundreds of miles away. Tank-to-tank battlefield communications, encrypted military orders, diplomatic messages. She became a SIGINT collector. Signals intelligence, a floating spy station with one job: listen to everything, report it back to NSA headquarters. And they disguised her, painted her hull neutral gray, mounted fake cargo booms to make her look like a research vessel, created a cover story. She was conducting electromagnetic propagation studies. Civilian science, nothing threatening, nothing military. But everyone in the intelligence community knew what she was. The Soviets knew. The Israelis knew. Because ships like Liberty were everywhere during the Cold War, hovering just outside territorial waters, vacuuming up secrets. By June 1967, Liberty had completed several deployments off the west coast of Africa, monitoring Soviet naval activities, tracking submarine movements, standard Cold War espionage. Then the Six-Day War erupted in the Middle East. On June 2nd, Liberty received new orders. Leave Spain immediately. Proceed to the eastern Mediterranean. Position yourself off the Sinai Peninsula. Monitor the war between Israel and Egypt. The Navy sent her alone. No destroyer escorts, no air cover. Just Liberty, her crew of 294 men, and the assumption that international waters meant safety. Orders specified she should stay at least 12.5 miles from the Egyptian coast and 6.5 miles from the Israeli coast. Far enough to be safe, close enough to intercept battlefield communications. What they didn't tell the Liberty's commander, Captain William McGonigal, was why. What was NSA listening for? What did the United States expect to hear? Some things, apparently, the crew didn't need to know. By the morning of June 8th, Liberty was in position. The war was going extraordinarily well for Israel. In just 4 days, they'd destroyed the Egyptian Air Force, pushed deep into the Sinai, and were advancing toward the Suez Canal. And USS Liberty was listening to it all. June 8th, 0950 hours. 2 unidentified Delta-wing jet fighters, presumably Israeli Mirages, circled the USS Liberty. The crew watched them. The pilots were close enough that sailors could see them in the cockpits. The jets made multiple passes. Low, slow, reconnaissance runs. The Liberty was flying her American flag, 5 feet by 8 feet, the largest naval ensign she carried. In the clear Mediterranean morning, with virtually no wind, that flag was visible for miles. Her hull identification number, GTR-5, was painted clearly on bow and stern. The Israeli jets flew away. For the next several hours, Israeli aircraft made at least 8 more reconnaissance passes over Liberty, circling, photographing, identifying. Then, at 3:05 p.m., everything changed. 2 Mirage fighters dove out of the sun without warning. No radio contact, no warning shots. They opened fire with 30mm cannons, strafing the length of the ship. Then came the napalm. Canisters of gelid gasoline exploded across the deck, turning men into human torches. The heat was so intense, paint bubbled on metal bulkheads. More jets arrived, super misters. They fired rockets into the ship's bridge and communications arrays, targeting the antennas, destroying Liberty's ability to call for help. Captain McGonagall, standing on the bridge, was hit by shrapnel in his right thigh and arm. He refused to leave his post. Blood soaking through his uniform, he continued directing damage control efforts. Liberty's crew tried to fight back with their only weapons, 4.50 caliber machine guns, deck-mounted, designed to fend off aircraft in World War II, useless against supersonic jets. The gunners tried anyway, and the Israeli pilots shot them down. One by one, bodies torn apart by cannon fire. For 25 minutes, the air attack continued. Wave after wave. The ship's communications equipment was destroyed. The bridge was riddled with holes. Fires raged across 3 decks. Then the jets left. The crew thought it was over. They began fighting fires, treating wounded, trying to get emergency transmitters working. Then they saw them. 3 Israeli motor torpedo boats racing in at high speed. The boats circled Liberty first, close enough that crew members could see the Israeli flags and hull numbers. Then they opened fire with 20mm and 40mm cannons, raking the deck, shooting at firefighting crews, targeting anyone visible. 1 sailor, manning an exposed machine gun position, was cut in half by cannon fire. Then the torpedoes. 5 torpedoes were launched. 1 struck Liberty amidships between frames 53 and 66. The explosion tore a hole 39 feet wide. The blast killed 25 men instantly in the ship's intelligence spaces, the compartment where NSA personnel were monitoring communications. Water flooded in. The ship listed 9 degrees to starboard. For a moment it looked like Liberty would sink, but the crew fought back. Damage control teams shored up bulkheads, pumped water, welded steel plates over the gaping wound in the hull. And then something happened that still defies explanation. The torpedo boats circled the ship again. Machine guns fired at life rafts. The rafts sailors were throwing into the water in case they had to abandon ship. They weren't shooting at the ship anymore. They were shooting at the lifeboats. Think about that. Under every law of war, under every code of naval conduct, you don't shoot at life rafts. You don't fire on survivors abandoning a sinking vessel. It's a war crime, period. But the Israeli boats did it anyway. At 3:07 p.m., 2 minutes after the air attack began, Liberty's radio operators managed to get an emergency transmission out before their equipment was destroyed. Under attack by unidentified jet aircraft. Require immediate assistance. The message reached the USS Saratoga and USS America, aircraft carriers of the 6th Fleet stationed 400 miles away. Response was immediate. Fighter jets launched from the USS America, armed and ready for combat. The pilots were briefed. American ship under attack. Identify attackers. Engage if necessary. 12 F-4 Phantom jets, the fastest fighters in the Navy, screaming toward Liberty at the supersonic speeds. Estimated time to target, 20 minutes. But then something extraordinary happened. 6 minutes after launch, while Liberty was still under attack, while men were still dying, the fighters were recalled. Ordered back, ordered to land. The rescue was aborted. Years later, the official explanation was that the order came from Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara and President Lyndon Johnson himself. The moment they learned the attackers were Israeli, the rescue was called off. Why? The official story. Because Israel was an ally. Because it was clearly a mistake. Because sending American fighters to engage Israeli forces would create an international incident. But here's what doesn't add up. At that moment, 6 minutes after launching fighters, how did McNamara and Johnson know the attackers were Israeli? Liberty's communications were destroyed. The 6th Fleet commanders didn't know who was attacking. The pilots hadn't reached the ship yet to identify the aircraft. Unless someone told them. Unless the United States already knew exactly what was happening. Meanwhile, on Liberty, the crew had no idea help had been recalled. They kept fighting, kept hoping, kept dying. When the attack finally ended at 3:40 p.m., 35 minutes of continuous assault, the ship was a wreck. 34 dead, 171 wounded, nearly 70% of the crew were casualties. It was the highest casualty rate for any U.S. Navy vessel since World War II. And at 3:45 p.m., Israel sent a message. We're sorry. We mistook your ship for the Egyptian vessel El Qusair. Terrible accident. The El Qusair was a rusted Egyptian horse transport, a third the size of Liberty. Completely different profile. An ancient cargo ship versus a modern technical research vessel. The Israeli explanation made no sense, but the United States government accepted it immediately. Within hours of the attack, the orders came down from Washington. Classify everything. A Navy court of inquiry was convened. The investigation lasted just 8 days. 8 days to investigate the worst peacetime attack on a U.S. Navy vessel in history. The survivors were ordered not to talk. They were threatened with court-martial if they discussed the attack with anyone, even their families. National security? They were told, for the good of the country. Captain McGonigal, who kept his ship afloat through extraordinary courage and leadership, was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration for valor. But the ceremony was held not at the White House, as tradition demands, but at the Washington Navy Yard. A quiet ceremony, no press, no publicity. President Johnson didn't attend. He sent a subordinate. The message was clear: shut up about this. The Court of Inquiry's final report concluded the attack was a case of mistaken identity. Tragic, but not criminal. Just the fog of war. But the survivors knew better. They'd seen Israeli reconnaissance planes circle them for hours before the attack. They'd seen pilots close enough to identify their American flag. They'd watched torpedo boat crews come close enough to see hull numbers and still open fire. And most damning, they'd monitored radio transmissions from Israeli pilots to their command center. NSA intercepts, still classified to this day, reportedly contained conversations where pilots identified Liberty as American and were ordered to attack anyway. Former U.S. Ambassador to Lebanon Dwight Porter has alleged that NSA intercepts recorded an Israeli pilot identifying the ship as American and receiving orders from ground control to attack regardless, although no official transcripts have ever been released. For decades, Liberty survivors have demanded a real investigation, a congressional inquiry, declassification of the NSA intercepts. For decades, they've been refused. In 2005, the USS Liberty Veterans Association filed a report of war crimes with the Department of Defense. They documented the deliberate attacks on life rafts, the targeting of wounded, the continued assault after American identity was known. The report was never acted upon. Why? Why would the United States government refuse to investigate an attack on its own ship? Why accept Israel's explanation when the evidence contradicted it? The theories are chilling. Theory 1. Israel was monitoring Liberty's intercepts. They knew Liberty was listening to Israeli battlefield communications. And on June 8th, Israeli forces were preparing to attack the Golan Heights, Syrian territory, in violation of ceasefire agreements the United States was negotiating. Israel couldn't risk Liberty intercepting those orders and reporting them to Washington. Theory 2. Israeli forces had just captured the town of El Arish in Sinai. Reports, unconfirmed but persistent, claim Israeli forces executed hundreds of Egyptian prisoners of war there. Mass executions, war crimes. And Liberty's antenna arrays were pointed directly at El Arish, intercepting communications about the massacre. Israel couldn't allow that evidence to reach American intelligence. Theory 3. The simplest, darkest theory. Israel wanted to sink Liberty completely, destroy all evidence, blame it on Egypt, draw the United States into the war against Egypt and the Soviet-backed Arab coalition. But Liberty survived. The plan failed. And both governments decided a cover-up was better than the truth. We may never know which theory is true, or if the truth is something even worse. Today, the official position remains unchanged. The attack on USS Liberty was a tragic mistake. Israel apologized. Compensation was paid. $3.32 million for the families of the dead, $3.57 million for the wounded, $6 million for the ship. Case closed. Move on. Nothing to see here. But the men who were there that day, the survivors who watched their friends burn, who saw pilots firing on life rafts, who heard the truth on those intercepted radio transmissions, they know better. And every year, their numbers shrink. Age takes what the attack didn't. Soon, there will be no witnesses left. No one to contradict the official story. And maybe that's the point. USS Liberty is the most highly decorated ship in U.S. Navy history for a single action. Presidential Unit Citation, 11 Silver Stars, 20 Bronze Stars, over 200 Purple Hearts, the Medal of Honor, all those decorations, all that valor, for an attack that was officially just a mistake. Does that make sense to you? The truth is buried in classified files. NSA intercepts that will probably stay sealed forever. Israeli military records that conveniently went missing. Diplomatic cables that got lost in the archives. Operation Silent Storm wasn't an official code name. It's what some intelligence analysts privately called Liberty's mission. The silent, unseen observation of a war where everyone was lying. Where allies weren't allies, where the fog of war was deliberately created to hide atrocities, and when the observers got too close to the truth, they had to be silenced. 34 men died that day, keeping a secret they didn't even know they'd discovered. 171 more carry the physical and mental scars of an attack their own government won't acknowledge. And somewhere, in a classified vault, the truth sits waiting. Audio recordings of Israeli pilots, NSA transcripts, CIA reports, all the evidence that would answer once and for all whether June 8, 1967 was a tragic mistake, or a war crime covered up by two governments that decided friendship was more valuable than justice. The Liberty survivors are dying. The witnesses are disappearing. The files stay classified. And the lie continues. If this story disturbs you, if you believe those 34 men deserve more than convenient lies, if you think the truth matters more than diplomatic convenience, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories like this, more missions that officially never happened, more secrets both governments don't want you to know. The witnesses are dying. The truth is being buried. But we're going to keep digging, one classified file at a time.